As the work week comes to a close, the commercial district of Colorado Springs is bustling with activity.
Arcadia and Fillmore is an intersection that has a lot of small businesses.
People, stop to pick up things and quickly in and out kind of thing.
Rose Barrett and her daughter Lanny Bubeck are headed home after running some errands.
Are you gonna make dinner tonight?
I don't know. What would you like?
On that particular day, I had taken my daughter grocery shopping.
Rose and Lanny pull into a strip mall parking lot near Lanny's house.
Hope we got everything this time.
We were unloading groceries from the vehicle when it happened.
Hey, what are you doing, girl, man?
I heard loud voices, and I looked over to the left to the store, and I saw some people out there.
All right. Do you see that?
2 men and a woman seem to be involved in a heated exchange.
They were arguing. I'm a very nosy person, I just had to stand there and watch it.
That's when a 3rd man steps in, and all hell breaks loose.
Oh my goodness. Oh.
The man and the woman disappeared around the side of the shopping center, and must have been about a minute later, the gentleman came back around the corner and he was clutching himself.
He was walking kind of funny, and he collapsed across the street from us.
Oh, one of them's bleeding.
And my daughter said, "Mom, he's been stabbed." And I said, "No, he hasn't." She said, "Yes, Mom, he's been stabbed."
We saw the blood on his shirt and realized that something had happened.
We better call somebody. Come on, let's go.
Across town, Lt.Joe Kenda is locking up for the weekend.
At the end of a very long day, I was kind of pleased that I was finally going to get to go home. And the phone rang at my desk.
This is Kenda.
It was the communications center. We just got a stabbing up on Fillmore Street, and it looks like it's pretty serious. And they're asking for detectives.
All right, I'll be right there.
What is unique about this kind of work is there is no work day. We respond to things that go badly in the world, and it doesn't matter what time or what day or what week. There are some people standing around, not a lot of people, but there are some. It's not the usual chaotic thing that you see. It's kind of quiet.
How you doing?
Hey, Lieutenant.
So what we got?
We had an altercation in front of the liquor store.
Though it's unclear exactly what transpired, at some point a knife was drawn and a man was stabbed.
We've identified our victim as Raymond Archuleta. He's 31 years old. The victim's been transported by ambulance with a single stab wound of the central chest.
Was he still alive?
Yes, sir, he was.
Kenda knows there's no better witness than the victim himself. That is, if he lives.
If his wound is serious enough, it could kill him at any moment. So there's a time factor here. We don't have forever.
Get a couple officers up there, see if they can get a statement.
Yes, sir.
Why don't you ask around, see if anyone saw anything?
Right. Dispatch, I need 2 officers to go to the hospital.
The officers were trying to get information from him as to what happened and who was involved.
As some of his men head to the hospital, Kenda takes a closer look at the crime scene.
There is a bloodstain on the sidewalk. There are some flowers that have been dropped near the bloodstain. Now, they are a bizarre artifact. What the hell are they doing there? This is extremely odd. At this point, we don't know very much. What made this happen?
Lieutenant, you may want to talk to these women.
How you doing, Lieutenant Kenda?
It's Rose Barrett and Lanny Bubeck, the mother and daughter who witnessed the incident firsthand.
You saw what happened?
Yeah, there was a girl and a guy.
It was very nerve-wracking. I did tell them exactly what I saw.
Lanny and Rose tell Kenda that a couple was having words with a young man. As the situation escalated, another individual tried to intervene.
And it seemed to be a very brief encounter, but all of a sudden this guy's on the ground, he's dead.
What about the flowers? Where do they come from?
The girl was holding the flowers, but she dropped them.
Kenda also suspects that if the girl was holding the flowers, her boyfriend was the one wielding the knife. But where are they now?
Can you describe him?
The guy, he had dark hair, maybe some facial hair.
The gentleman was of slender build, possibly, 5'6" to 5'8".
The girl was young. She had long hair down her back.
She did not appear to be Latin to me, where I realized that the other two men involved in the incident were Latin.
It's a good start, but Kenda needs more than just a generic description.
Would you mind hanging out for a little while?
Yeah, it's fine.
I appreciate it.
He calls on a rarely used but vital member of his team.
Lieutenant Kenda, dispatch. Can I get a sketch artist out to the corner of Fillmore and Arcadia? Need a couple composites drawn.
Within minutes, a sketch artist is on scene.
Thanks for coming. I actually got 2 witnesses right here. Just saw 2 suspects fleeing. Can you get a couple composites as soon as possible for me?
Sure, no problem.
All right, thank you.
They can basically draw a composite photo, if you will, of the suspect based on information given to them from the witnesses.
So here's the book that I want you to look through and tell me which features most resemble the suspect.
They brought the artist kit that had different types of eyes, different types of chins, noses, eyebrows, hairlines, and asking which one best fit his description and would draw it from there.
You mean that one or?
More like this one here.
That one?
Yeah, because it was higher up here.
And what about the eyes?
If they independently say that that's very similar in the appearance, it's a good tool to eliminate people with or to identify a particular person.
Yeah.
How about this?
Yeah, it looks better, yeah.
Kenda hopes to get the name of a suspect to compare to the sketches. At the moment, that looks like an uphill battle.
These witnesses certainly don't know the male with the knife and his girlfriend. They don't know identities of anybody. We're hopeful that our victim can help us out with that.
When investigators head to the hospital to speak with victim Raymond Archuleta, they're dealt a devastating setback.
Doctor?
I'm sorry he didn't make it.
Raymond ultimately died on the table during surgery. This shifts from an assault investigation to a murder investigation.
Can you tell me about the wound?
It was a 4-inch puncture wound at the left ventricle of his heart.
A single wound, but it is a stab wound in the left ventricle of the heart. That wound is fatal.
And in this case, puzzling. It would seem 4 inches wouldn't be deep enough to reach Raymond's heart.
Let me describe something to you about stab wounds. The human body is flexible. The chest cavity moves. If you thrust a knife into a chest, the force of the blow compresses the chest. So a 4-inch bladed knife can produce a wound that's 9 inches deep. You would think you'd need a big knife. No, you don't.
With the victim now deceased, Kenda's best hope for identifying his killer lies with Raymond's loved ones.
You know where his family is?
They're this way.
In the waiting room, Kenda finds the Archuleta family, still coming to grips with their devastating loss.
When my mother called to tell me that my brother was hurt and he was transported to the hospital, of course I panicked. When we got there, they had already pronounced him dead.
My mother was very close to Raymond. She didn't take it very well.
You feel so bad for her, and in your heart, you know there's nothing you can do about it, not yet. And you can't offer her much other than the hope that we will resolve this.
Can you tell me a little bit about Raymond? Sometimes a little bit of background can help with an investigation.
He had 2 children, a daughter named Virginia and a son named Raymond Jr. And they're both wonderful children. He loved his children very, very much.
He's a construction worker, so he's solid build. He's a strong individual.
I love the job you did on this deck. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Raymond had a brother named William. According to their mother, the two were practically inseparable.
They were very close, always were close since they were little. They always were together. They worked together, they played together, and they were there for each other.
Raymond's mother also says that earlier that afternoon, the 2 brothers had been hanging out and having a few beers.
Virginia says that she saw William and Raymond earlier in the day, that William had been drinking. Raymond had been drinking as well, but not as much as William. They seemed to be in a good mood. So we asked Virginia, do you know where William is? And she says, no, I don't.
I haven't seen him all night.
It did seem sort of out of place that William never showed up at the hospital.
Is William Archuleta the unidentified third man who tried to intervene in the altercation between Raymond and the couple? Or worse, is William Archuleta the one who stabbed Raymond? Though the latter theory seems unlikely, Kenda takes nothing for granted.
When you have someone close to a murder case who suddenly isn't where they're supposed to be, that's generally not a good thing. Where is he?
Kenda's best hope for finding William is through his grieving family.
I have pressured people in that situation when I thought it was necessary. I don't believe it was this time. She was suffering, and I saw no reason to increase her suffering.
Would it be possible to talk to you tomorrow?
You can come to our house tomorrow. William will be back later.
Thank you.
Our best witness was William Archuleta, and we can't put our hands on him right now. What if William knows this girl, or knows this guy, or knows them both, and his brother gets in the way of William being the intended victim? He's got to have more to offer us than the perfect strangers do. We need to find him right away. So where are we here? This is a minor confrontation on the street that leads to a murder in under half a minute. We know there's a guy and a girl involved in this. We have no idea who they are.
Lt.Joe Kenda knows the victim, Raymond Archuleta, was drinking with his brother William shortly before the stabbing.
We can't seem to find him at the moment.
Could William Archuleta have had a hand in his brother's murder?
So we arrive at the family home looking for William.
Can you tell me what you know about what happened yesterday?
Well, the last I saw them, they were out in the backyard. Will and Raymond were out there having a beer together.
I had some job interviews. Yeah? How's that going? They're supposed to call me.
And I know Will had already had too much to drink, but I wasn't worried because he was with Raymond.
Boys okay? You need anything?
Mom, we're good.
William was very drunk. They say that Raymond is protective of him, tries to keep an eye out for him.
Did any of you see William last night?
Yes, he was here when we got back from the hospital.
As Kenda listens to the Archuleta women, a young man staggers into the kitchen.
Is that William?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Excuse me for a second. William?
Yes.
How you doing?
William has difficulty standing. William has difficulty focusing his eyes.
It's clear that William is still intoxicated from the night before, which to Kenda rules him out as a suspect in his brother's murder.
William can't find his way home, let alone get involved in some nefarious plot leading to the death of his brother. If there was any suspicion about William, it fades away seeing his condition.
I know you're probably still in shock about what happened yesterday, but I need to tell me about it.
I don't remember anything.
He remembers being with his brother. He remembers drinking. He doesn't remember there being a stabbing, and he can't understand why his brother is dead.
That's all.
We were considering whether or not it was because he was so drunk he really did black out. But again, it could be something that either he did not want to share out of fear or just shock of the incident itself.
So he remains, for our purposes, useless at this point.
All right, well, if you do happen to remember anything at all, make sure you call the office and let me know.
With his only eyewitness of little use, Kenda looks to the other family members for new leads.
Can you think of anyone else that might have been having problems with Raymond?
I can't think of Raymond having any enemies. He never talked about anyone that he didn't like or that he was feuding with.
Everyone loved my son.
That is her son, the most important thing in the world to her. She is devastated by this and is wanting to know what she can do to help us, what she can do to find out who killed her boy.
Do you think you're going to be able to find his murderer?
And I feel awful at that moment.
I'm going to do everything I can to find out who did this, Mrs. Salazar. I promise.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
I can't tell her I know who did this because I don't. I can't tell her I think I know who did this because I don't know that either. It's a very awkward feeling.
As Kenda heads back to his office, Detective Skip Arms approaches him with a promising lead.
Hey, Lieutenant. Found a piece of paper in Raymond's wallet.
What's it say?
Got the name Kevin written on it.
We find a piece of paper in our victim's pocket with an address on Arcadia Street, which of course runs right up to the crime scene. So, who is Kevin? Why would he have his address in his pocket?
Well, let's go pay Kevin a visit. How you doing?
Good.
We're with the Colorado Springs Police Department. There was a murder happened up the street last night. Did you know anything about that?
Just, what I've heard on the news.
Did you know the victim, Raymond Archuleta?
No.
Is there someone named Kevin that lives here?
What would Kevin have to do with any of this?
He realizes that we're probably not just going to walk off the porch, so he says, well, it's my wife's nephew.
He moved in with his grandparents a while back.
Where's that at?
The Yampa Street Apartments.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
So we went out to the Yampa Street Apartments, and Kevin was not there.
Excuse me, ma'am?
Yes.
With their suspect nowhere to be found, detectives try a different tactic.
Do you know Kevin who lives here?
Yes.
Does this look like him?
They show neighbors the composite sketch of the killer, hoping it resembles Kevin.
One of the people we did show that drawing to was the building manager. Building managers know their tenants pretty well. I'm going to show you this drawing.
No, not at all.
That picture looks nothing like him at all.
Other tenants also fail to see a resemblance.
No, that's not Kevin.
Composite pictures are very often more helpful in eliminating people than they are in including people.
Usually if you get consistent feedback from other people and they say, I know that person and this isn't him, it's pretty easy to then put that one aside and say that the person's not involved.
So we eliminate him based on a physical description alone.
All right, thank you for your time.
Sure.
Kenda's team is without a suspect or even a lead.
Since we're in a position in this case of not having a place to go, we certainly need one. And it's like you do in every murder case, you go back to the beginning.
Detectives head to a liquor store adjacent to the crime scene, hoping the employees might recognize the killer and his girlfriend from the composite sketches.
How you doing?
Hello, pretty good.
Does the guy in this photo look like the guy that pulled the knife last night?
I heard there was an argument yesterday, but I didn't really get to see too much of it.
Yeah, we heard there was a fight over a girl.
Is that her?
Then they look at the female drawing, and they both say,
That looks like Alicia.
Yeah, Alicia Santos.
She came in fairly regularly, worked at a nearby donut shop, and she was often with a boyfriend, and so the employees at the liquor store felt that perhaps she could have been the girlfriend that the police were looking for.
she is in that store all the time. That's kind of the key for me. We didn't have a person that matches this picture that's here all the time. And here is where our murder happened.
Yes, sir.
This is very promising stuff.
All right, thank you.
After tracking down her address, detectives head to Alicia's house. But when they arrive, they find a teenager out front, visibly shaken.
Hey, what's going on here?
My sister gonna take her to the hospital.
Is it serious?
I don't know, just go home.
Kenda wonders if Alicia's boyfriend was truly the one who stabbed Raymond Archuleta. Could he have turned his knife on Alicia too?
We need to chase that ambulance and find out what the hell is happening. We're now at the stage of this investigation where we have a minor street fight that results in the death of 31-year-old Raymond Archuleta. We have composite drawings of suspects. We have clerks in the store where this murder occurred that put a name to the female in the composite.
That looks like Alicia.
But when Kenda goes to speak with his new lead, Alicia Santos, he finds her sister instead.
Hey, what's going on here?
My sister gonna take her to the hospital.
If Alicia's boyfriend is the killer, could he have attacked her too?
Did somebody hurt her?
No, she was complaining about cramps this morning. She's pregnant.
According to the sister, Alicia has an infection and is worried about it harming her unborn baby.
Where's her boyfriend at?
Robert, it's actually her husband. He went with her in the ambulance.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Kenda needs to see if Robert and Alicia are in fact his killer couple.
How you doing?
Good.
Do you have Alicia Santos back there?
We do.
How's she doing?
She's doing fine, and the baby's doing fine.
I'll wait out here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
On the way out.
Alicia comes out and she is beyond pregnant. In the face, she does look like the drawing, but it stops there.
Eyewitness Lanny Bubick never mentioned anything about the killer's girlfriend being pregnant. But does Robert fit her description?
She describes the guy as a little guy, that he's small, he's maybe 5'3", slightly built. The girl that's with him is 4 or 5 inches taller than he is, and she's quite sure about that.
Excuse me, Alicia Santos? Robert?
Yes, sir.
We meet Robert, the real focus of our interest in Alicia, and we are profoundly disappointed. Robert is over 6 feet tall. He is a big guy. So not only is he the wrong size, so is she. It can't possibly be either one of these people. So our promising lead has just gone up in smoke.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With Robert and Alicia ruled out as suspects, Kenda's only lead remains the eyewitnesses, who saw the killer but can't name him.
We're not getting anywhere fast, and you start to get depressed. Why aren't we finding something of significance?
Weeks pass. With no developments to report to Raymond Archuletta's family, Kenda is feeling the heat.
It's frustrating, it's maddening, it makes you angry, it makes you sad, it makes you not wanting to face the victim's mother ever again, but you're going to have to anyway.
But when Kenda reaches out to the Archulettas to update them on the lack of progress, he receives some welcome news. The family has turned up a new lead.
What's the name?
The word on the street is that this is over a dispute involving the Archuleta brothers and a drug dealer by the name of Mike, and that Mike is responsible for the stabbing. We identify Mike, and he happens to be in jail. It's rather convenient.
What's more, Kenda's new suspect, 18-year-old Mike Burkhardt, bears a resemblance to the composite sketch of the killer. But Kenda will need more than that to concretely tie Mike Burkhardt to the crime.
One of the tools that is used by police in investigations are physical lineups. The lineups usually come from the jail population. And so the goal is to try to get people that are of similar builds and stature. Obviously, the hope for the detectives involved are that all of your witnesses are going to come in and immediately recognize your suspect.
I appreciate you ladies coming in today. What's going to happen is we're going to have a random group of guys come in. They can't see you through the glass. I want you to tell me if you recognize any one of them from the stabbing. Okay?
Okay, I understand.
We give them the usual admonishment. There may or may not be a person contained within this group of people who could be the person responsible for this crime.
And they're not compelled to choose anybody unless they're absolutely certain.
You can go ahead and send them in.
We put Mike in this physical lineup. He happens to be in position number 3. It's the way the jailers lined him up before they walked him in there. There's no reason that he's in 3, he just is.
Rose Barrett and her daughter Lanny sit behind a one-way mirror and survey each man in the lineup.
Take your time.
Sometimes you can almost feel a sense of panic on the witness's part because they may have this internal sense that they're compelled to pick somebody.
I was very nervous. It was very surreal. I was not scared, just very nervous.
We don't comment, we don't inquire, because we don't want to influence anybody. We are, of course, hopeful that number 3 is going to get everybody's attention.
One of them looks familiar to me.
Which one is that?
Number 3.
Could you have number 3 step forward, please?
You are anxious that maybe this is going to get us somewhere. We got very hopeful when Rose asked Mike to turn.
We get his profiles. Turn to the left.
We thought that could be significant, that that's the guy with the knife. Wouldn't that be wonderful? We've had several months of frustration in this case. We're finally to the point to where we might have somebody. We've done a physical lineup with a suspect in position number 3. We're hoping beyond hope that our witnesses are going to say that's the guy.
Number 3.
Could you have number 3 step forward, please?
When witnesses are viewing physical lineups, they may ask a suspect to turn around to get a different profile because maybe that's the profile they saw them from.
We want you to take as much time as you like. We'd like you to be as certain as you can be.
I did not want to choose the wrong person because looking at them, I was not sure.
You try to read a witness. They're looking at the people, but you're looking at the witness. My experience tells me when somebody identifies or recognizes someone, their face changes.
I don't know. There's something about that jawline that's not right.
You can see the recognition in their face, and I never saw that.
I don't think that's him.
Nope, not the guy.
Are you absolutely positive it's not him?
Yes, I am.
I don't think it's him.
No.
I could tell him what he looked like, but I could not pick him out.
Thank you, we're all set.
It's not him, which means we still have no idea who him is.
All right, thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Sorry.
With his latest suspect scratched from the list, Kenda finds himself right back where he started.
I would sit in my office and I would torture myself when you have cases like this. What did you do wrong? What did you forget? What did you not do? What did you fail to see? It's maddening. It's absolutely maddening.
Months pass, and no new leads materialize. Until one day, when a detective of Kenda's catches up with him at lunch.
Hey, Pop, how you doing?
Hey, Joe, how you doing today?
Can I get the pulled pork, coleslaw, and baked beans today, please?
Sure.
This detective comes to me right away.
Sorry, Lieutenant.
Hey, what's up?
Hey, I just talked to a guy a few minutes ago who says he knows something about stabbing at Fillmore.
Detectives in downtown Colorado Springs are contacted by a man named Jim Spoon.
Hey.
Yeah.
You guys are detectives, right?
Yeah.
Well, my girl, she has an ex-boyfriend that lives in her house, and he threatens her. And she's terrified of him.
We work homicide, so I'd suggest that you go downtown and file a report on that.
The cops are already getting bored with this. Like, is there a point to this story?
Wait, that's not all. I heard he stabbed the guy outside the Fillmore liquor store.
What did you say?
Where's he at right now?
He's back at the station.
You can call in and have him put him in my office.
Kenda needs to meet Jim Spoon face to face.
Hey, Pop, I'm gonna have to cancel that. I'll catch you tomorrow.
All right, appreciate it. I'll see you later. Be safe out there.
Thank you. So what can you tell me about the stabbing at the liquor store on Fillmore?
My girlfriend's ex, he stabbed that guy. His name is Lt.Joe. He's crazy and dangerous.
Kenda looks his suspect up in the criminal database.
We find one Anthony, no middle name, Drago. He's a former inmate, Colorado State Penitentiary, hasn't been out that long.
27-year-old Anthony Idrogo has a lengthy history of burglary. Not only does he resemble the composite sketch, he matches the rest of the eyewitness description.
He is 5'3" and weighs 115 pounds. That would certainly classify as a little guy. I am really liking this.
Kenda is increasingly convinced Anthony Idrogo is the killer, and that Jim Spoon's girlfriend, Anthony's ex, is the girl with the flowers.
I'm going to speak to your girlfriend. Do you mind giving her a call for me?
Honey, it's me. Yeah, I'm down at the police station.
She's really scared. She's scared she's going to go to jail. Anthony has told her that if she says anything, he'll see to it that she goes down with him.
She's scared. She doesn't want to.
Let me talk to her.
Look, I'm going to pass you over. Okay?
What's your name?
Carol.
Hello, Carol. This is Lieutenant Kenda.
She's really nervous on the phone, almost in tears, afraid she's going to go to jail. Maybe she needs a lawyer.
No, I understand.
You have to be really, really careful. You can't spook her. You can't run her off. You have to reel her in because she is the key to this case.
Well, listen, I'm gonna need you to come down to the station and talk to me. I give you my word, nothing bad will happen to you. I guarantee it.
Our only interest in this case is Anthony Idrago. And I said to her, I believe you are not a participant in the crime itself. You understand?
20 minutes later, Kenda is in the interrogation room, face to face with his last best hope for solving the case.
Thank you for coming in today. I just need you to tell me exactly what happened at the liquor store that night.
She says she and Anthony Idrago are kind of basically on their way home. But Tony wants to buy some rolling papers. They stop at Fillmore Liquors.
I was waiting outside when some drunk guy kept coming up to me, wouldn't leave me alone.
How's it going?
Hey,
What are you doing?
I'm waiting on someone.
Can I get you anything?
No, good.
Please, let me just get you something.
I'm good, thank you.
He's like super drunk. She said he's not aggressive. He's just a pain. He's telling her how pretty she is, and he wants to give her flowers.
All right, you're lost.
The man, William Archuleta, joins his brother Raymond inside, where Anthony Idrago is picking up rolling papers, and where, at the checkout counter, several small bouquets of flowers are on sale.
Let's see, what is this?
When Raymond and William exit, William stops to give Carol a present.
I got you these.
Thanks.
Please.
Wouldn't go away, so eventually I just took the flowers.
And Tony gets angry and tells this guy to get away from his girl.
What are you doing?
Well, I didn't know she had a I didn't know you had a
She's waiting on
boyfriend.
somebody, isn't she?
And William, being a pain, persists.
I didn't know she had a boyfriend, man.
I just want to give her flowers, man, that's all.
I give her the flowers. She needs flowers, I'll get her flowers.
Hey, what are you gonna do, little man?
They started going at it, and then this other guy came over to try and help the drunk guy.
And that would be Raymond, the victim.
Yeah, well, he was just trying to help his friend, so that just pissed Tony off even more.
What's your problem, man? Whoa, you need... Let's go, little guy. You little punk.
It's a switchblade, spring-loaded, press a button, the blade extends. Double-edged.
And what did Raymond do?
He wasn't scared.
Tony, come on, let's go. What's your problem, man? What's your problem? You little punk.
He says to the girl, I just stabbed that dude, let's go.
Come on.
And what did you guys do then?
And I didn't know what to do, so I just ran with him.
After fleeing the scene, Anthony and Carol took cover in a nearby shed.
They're gonna find us.
Nobody saw us come in here.
Now, Tony's a criminal. He's experienced. He wants to change his appearance. He takes off his shirt and he balls it up and he throws it in the corner of the shed. They wait for some time.
Once the coast was clear, Anthony disposed of the knife, and they took off. A few days later, the couple got word that Raymond Archuleta died from the stab wound. Panicked, Anthony went back to the shed and retrieved the murder weapon from the bushes.
He finds his knife, he puts it in a bag, And the next day, he drives to the landfill so he can dispose of this knife.
By that point, Carol realized she needed to break up with Anthony, but not before Anthony threatened to hurt her if she ever talked to police.
I just hope you get him.
I'm gonna do my best.
It would seem that Anthony Idrogo has done away with all incriminating evidence, but Kenda knows better.
Mind taking a ride with me?
Tony thinks he is one smart dude, but think back to what he's done. He didn't get the shirt out of the shed, now did he? Carol Babb named our killer as Anthony Idrogo. I need evidence to back up what she says.
Lt.Joe Kenda knows he can't get an arrest warrant without physical evidence, namely the hoodie Anthony discarded in a shed not far from the crime scene.
So we're going to a shed looking for exactly that.
Can you describe the shirt for me?
Medium blue hoodie with white stripes.
But as Kenda and Carol Babb reach the shed,
it's a door around the front?
Yeah, right over there.
A man emerges.
Excuse me, sir. I'm investigating a homicide, and I think there may be a piece of evidence in your shed.
I don't know anything about a murder.
What I'm looking for is a shirt that someone else might have left in there.
He thinks about that for a minute, and well, I don't know if there's anything in there or not, but I got a lot of rags in the corner.
May I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks.
He keeps all these rags in a bag, and he said, well, here.
Is that it right there?
That's it.
There might be a shirt in here, I don't know, but let me just dump this out right here in the corner. And he empties this bag.
Kenda sifts through the pile, separating each rag from the next.
I feel that drawstring in the pile, and I lift it up, and there it is. A blue shirt with a white string tie and neck.
Is that it?
Yeah.
That's the shirt he was wearing. How certain are you? 100% that's the shirt he was wearing. I bought it for him. There is what I need. A story and irrefutable evidence to go with it. We put together an arrest warrant for murder. Carol tells us what time he usually comes home from his running around. We sit in front of this residence. You take a lot of precaution when you confront these people.
Kenda and his men prepare to take their man into custody.
How you doing?
Hey, Lieutenant, what's going on?
I need you to coordinate with the other units. Have them staged just out of sight of the house. As soon as I see the guy, I'll get the go signal over the radio.
Sounds good. We'll do.
All that remains is to wait for Anthony to show up.
Surveillance is boring. It is incredibly boring.
And it's also high risk for officers because once they know that they have killed somebody, you never know if they're going to kill the next person that confronts them.
You always go through the worst case scenarios. You know, he burns us, he comes out of the car blazing away with a handgun. And you have to kind of push that aside and say, no, we're just going to arrest this guy. That's all we're going to do.
Well, that's him.
At 4:40 p.m., Anthony Idrogo pulls into the driveway.
Go, go, go!
We don't let him get in the house. We take him on the street. We say, Anthony, you're under arrest for murder. I would never raise my voice because it's more frightening to people. They expect to be yelled at by the police. I always say the same thing. My name is Kenda from the police department. You're under arrest for murder. If you don't do what I say, I'm going to kill you right here and right now. And when you say it in that tone, they believe you. He didn't react. He didn't reach in his pockets. He didn't do anything. He's looking down a barrel of 4 guns.
Anthony Idrogo never confesses to the crime, but Kenda already has a good idea of what went down.
Rama sees a confrontation. He sees stumbling William standing there.
What's the problem? Little punk.
And the suspect, Tony, opens that knife and thrusts a single time at Anthony's chest. I would think if Anthony didn't have a knife, Raymond would have folded him up and made a paper airplane out of him, which is why Anthony had a knife.
2 years after stabbing and killing Raymond Archuleta, Anthony Idrogo is convicted of manslaughter. But because of his already lengthy rap sheet, he is sentenced to life in prison.
It's a very satisfying thing to work so hard and for so long and not get anywhere, and then to get everywhere all at once.
But even with Anthony Idrogo behind bars, the death of Raymond Archuleta is a tragedy his family is still coming to grips with.
My brother Raymond did not deserve that, no. Because he wouldn't hurt anybody. He wasn't a fighter, he was a lover.
It was a big loss for all of us. For William, myself, my mother, the whole family. He missed out of his children growing up. So he missed out a lot in life.
But perhaps it is hardest for William, the brother Raymond died protecting.
He just doesn't want to talk about it because he lost a brother that he loved dearly. He misses him very much.
I think that Raymond stepped up for his brother all of his life, and I think that he stepped into something he didn't realize what was happening. He thought this was going to be a minor verbal thing, and the next thing you know, he takes a blade through his heart. It cost him his life, and I'm sure he had no anticipation that that's what it was going to cost.
They still whisper about it like a headline that never stopped printing, like ink that won't dry, like a siren you can't unhear. Chevy Chase 2001 cold case cracked. 3 words that sound like justice. 1 word that sounds like a lie. Because for the people who lived through that winter, the case was never cracked the way you crack a code and watch the answer fall out clean. It was cracked the way ice cracks under your feet, without warning, with a dark lake waiting underneath, and the splash still echoes in the quiet parts of the night. It began on a street that looked too perfect to hold a secret. Manicured hedges, porch lights like steady eyes, luxury cars tucked into driveways, curtains drawn against the cold. Chevy Chase had the kind of calm that made people careless, the kind of calm that made them believe evil had a different zip code. December in 2001 arrived with a clean bite, air so sharp it felt polished, the sky a pale sheet, the trees stripped down to black veins. On paper, it was a safe place. In real life, it was a place where doors locked out strangers and let in the familiar, and sometimes the familiar was the problem. The call came in just after dawn, the hour when newspaper trucks still rolled and coffee was still a promise. A neighbor, out early with a dog that refused to stop pulling, noticed something wrong with the rhythm of the street. A front door slightly ajar. A porch light still on. No movement inside where there should have been. In a community that treated privacy like religion, that tiny breach, door not fully closed, felt like a scream. The neighbor hesitated, then did what people do when their instincts shout louder than their manners. They stepped closer. They called a name. Nothing. They called again, louder. Still nothing. And then they saw it, something small, on the threshold, something pale against dark wood. A glove. Or maybe it was paper. Or maybe it was the shape of panic taking form. Police arrived in minutes, not because Chevy Chase was used to emergencies, but because it wasn't. The squad car rolled up like an intruder itself, lights flashing blue against frost. Officers moved in with that quick stiffness, hands near holsters, eyes sweeping for motion. The front door opened wider with a soft complaint from its hinges, and the first breath of air that came out of the house was wrong. Not a smell exactly, not the kind you can describe and file away. More like a feeling, a pressure change, like stepping into a room where an argument just happened and everyone left in a hurry. Inside, everything looked ordinary at a glance, and that was the first violent thing about it. A framed family photo on a table. A neat stack of mail. A holiday card taped to a mirror. A bowl on the counter holding keys that had not been taken. The living room had been lived in, blanket folded, remote control in place, a book face down like someone planned to return to it. But there were details that didn't belong, details that made the hair rise on the back of an officer's neck. A chair slightly out of position. A lamp knocked just a few degrees off center. A line on the hardwood where something had dragged, faint, like a question mark drawn with a dirty finger. And then, upstairs, the house stopped pretending. The victim, let's call her Elena, because the real name became too heavy to say out loud in that town, was someone people would describe as reliable. Reliable schedule. Reliable smile. Reliable volunteer at the school fundraiser, reliable neighbor who returned your misdelivered packages, reliable professional whose email replies came within the hour. She was in her early 30s. She had the kind of life that looked sealed shut, a career on the rise, a small circle of friends, a family that lived close enough to show up for birthdays but far enough to avoid daily friction. She wasn't famous. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't supposed to become a story. The scene was controlled chaos, the kind detectives learn to read the way a musician reads notes. There were no broken windows. No shattered glass glittering like confession. No loud signs of forced entry. The door downstairs had been opened without a fight, or after the fight was already over. It meant the person who came in wasn't a stranger, or they didn't need to act like one. It meant trust, or fear, or both. The first responders did what they always do: preserve, photograph, document. They marked the floor with little tents of evidence. They spoke in clipped words, careful not to breathe too hard on anything that might matter. Someone called the crime scene unit. Someone called the on-duty detective. Someone called the supervisor who didn't want to be called at that hour. And while the radios crackled and the camera shutters clicked, the neighborhood began to wake up, and the story began to leak out through blinds and over fences, carried on breath and disbelief. By mid-morning, the street was a row of watching faces. Neighbors gathered in small clusters, arms crossed tight, like they could hug themselves into safety. You could feel the community's mind trying to fix the problem by categorizing it. It must have been random. It must have been someone passing through. It must have been a mistake. But the house sat there like a contradiction, untouched on the outside, devastated within. Detectives started where they always start: time. When was Elena last seen? When was she last heard from? Her phone was found, silent. Her purse was there. Her keys were there. Her car sat in the driveway as if it had never imagined leaving. Her calendar showed routine. Meetings. A dinner plan. A note to pick up dry cleaning. The mundane scaffolding of a life that didn't anticipate an ending. The last confirmed sighting came the evening before. A neighbor saw her pulling into the driveway, headlights cutting across the street, a brief wave, the polite language of people who live near each other and know each other only in safe fragments. There was also a witness who claimed something else, something darker. Someone up late, insomnia and television glow, heard a car idle outside around midnight. Heard a door close softly. Heard what might have been a voice, low, controlled, not shouting, not pleading, just present. No screams. No gunshot. Nothing cinematic. Just the faint suggestion of company. But Chevy Chase was a place where the quiet was thick, and sometimes the quiet could hide a lot. They knocked on doors. They asked questions that made people flinch. Did you hear anything? Did you see anyone? Was anything unusual? At first, everyone said no. No, 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 like a prayer. Then the small yeses began to trickle in. Yes, a strange car parked down the block. Yes, a man walking a dog at a late hour, though nobody could say for sure if the dog was real or if memory was inventing it to fill a gap. Yes, a light on in Elena's upstairs window at a time she usually slept. Yes, a shadow moving behind curtains, the kind of shadow that could be nothing, or could be everything. The autopsy would later answer some questions and open others like wounds. It would give a time frame, broad enough to be cruel. It would confirm that this was not an accident, not a sudden collapse, not a tragic medical event. It was violent with intent. It was personal enough to be frightening, controlled enough to be chilling. But the specifics stayed behind closed doors, not because the public couldn't handle them, but because details are ammunition, and investigators needed every bullet they could keep. The first theory was the easiest: burglary gone wrong. It fit a simple narrative. Stranger enters. Things escalate. Victim dies. But the house didn't cooperate with that story. No ransacked drawers. No valuables obviously missing. No smashed safe. The kind of thieves who break in for money don't leave money behind. The kind of thieves who panic make noise. This was too clean, too selective. It felt like someone came for one thing, and that one thing was Elena. Then came the second theory, the one that changes the temperature in every room: someone she knew. Someone with access. Someone who could knock and be let in. Someone whose footsteps wouldn't trigger alarm, whose voice wouldn't set off screams right away. Detectives pulled phone records. They pulled emails. They sifted through her social life like archaeologists digging through the ruins of routine. Co-workers. Friends. Family. Old relationships. The ex-boyfriend. The colleague who lingered too long at office parties. The neighbor who asked too many questions. The stranger who wasn't a stranger anymore after enough repeated encounters. When the police went public, they did it with careful language. They asked for tips. They asked for anyone who saw anything between certain hours. They asked for surveillance footage, though in 2001 the neighborhood didn't have cameras on every doorbell yet. They asked for patience. The community heard something else: fear. The message beneath the message. There is someone out there. They have done this once. They could do it again. And then, as always, the case began to collect its own mythology. Rumors moved faster than evidence. Someone said Elena had been seeing someone secretly. Someone said there was a dispute at work. Someone said there had been an argument in a restaurant the week before. Someone said they saw a figure in dark clothing near the house that night, though they couldn't explain why they hadn't said it sooner. Everyone wanted to help, but everyone also wanted the story to land far away from their own front door. Detectives worked the leads hard, the way you do in the first 72 hours when the trail is still warm. They interviewed. They re-interviewed. They mapped Elena's last day like a tactical operation. Grocery store receipts. ATM withdrawals. A brief stop at a pharmacy. A phone call placed from her kitchen at 9:17 p.m. to a number that didn't belong to family. A short call. 39 seconds. Too quick to be a long conversation. Too long to be a wrong number. Who was on the other end? A friend? A co-worker? A mistake? Or someone arranging something that would look like nothing later? They brought in a dog. The dog traced a path to the curb, circled, and lost the scent. That detail hit the detectives like a fist. It suggested a vehicle. It suggested planning. It suggested whoever came didn't run on foot into the darkness. They left clean. They left fast. They left like they'd done it before or rehearsed it in their head so many times it felt like memory. Weeks turned into months. The neighborhood put up new lights, thicker locks, motion sensors. People who used to jog alone in the morning started jogging in pairs. Kids who used to ride bikes freely were kept closer, watched harder. The case infiltrated ordinary conversations. At the dry cleaner. At the coffee shop. At school pickup. Always the same tense tone, always the same question: wearing different clothing, did they find anyone? The answer stayed the same: not yet. Then something happened that set the town on fire without flames. A leak. A whispered claim from someone close to the investigation. A phrase that traveled from ear to ear like contraband: they've got DNA. In 2001, DNA still sounded like a magic spell to the public. It promised certainty. It promised an end. It promised a name. The community clung to that promise like a life raft. If there was DNA, the killer was already caught in time, just waiting for the science to catch up. But DNA is only a key if you have the lock. You can hold it in your hand forever and still stand outside. Investigators entered it into databases. They waited for hits that didn't come. They followed partial matches that led nowhere. They begged the technology of the era to do what it couldn't yet do fast enough. And as the years stacked up, 1, 5, 10, the case stopped being a breaking story and became a shadow story, the kind you mention in a lowered voice to newcomers, the kind parents reference when they tell their teenagers to call when they arrive somewhere, the kind of tragedy that turns into local folklore without ever becoming less real. Elena's family kept her room as it was for a long time. Friends marked anniversaries with quiet gatherings. Investigators changed assignments. Retired. Moved on. New detectives inherited old boxes filled with old photographs, old interview notes, old evidence bags sealed like time capsules. Each new pair of hands promised fresh eyes. Each new set of eyes saw the same brutal simplicity: a life ended, a town shaken, a killer unanswered. And then, years later, the headline returned, louder than before, resurrected like a ghost with a microphone: Chevy Chase 2001 cold case cracked. People saw it on their phones and felt their stomachs drop. Some cried before they even read the details. Some refused to believe it. Some felt relief, and then guilt for feeling relief. Because what does it mean when a community has been waiting so long that justice starts to feel like a myth? The problem was, the headline didn't match the feeling on the ground. It didn't match the unease that never left. It didn't match the small inconsistencies that still bled through the narrative like stains. A cold case doesn't crack with a single loud snap. It fractures. It splinters. It breaks unevenly. It leaves sharp edges. And in Chevy Chase, those edges were still there, still catching on people's thoughts when the house lights went out and the street fell into that polished winter quiet again, the quiet that had once felt safe, and now felt like it was listening. By the time the first winter after Elena's death gave way to spring, the neighborhood had learned a new kind of weather, one measured not in temperature, but in tension. You could see it in the way blinds stayed half-closed even at noon, in the way porch lights were left on long after sunrise like people didn't trust daylight to do its job, in the way neighbors started recognizing each other's cars not just as familiar shapes but as proof of survival. Chevy Chase still looked immaculate, still smelled like cut grass and fresh paint when the season warmed, but under the polish there was a thin, constant hiss of suspicion, like a radio stuck between stations. And the investigation, at first so loud it felt like it would shake answers loose from the walls, began to narrow into a grinding, methodical silence: paperwork, phone calls, interviews repeated until voices turned flat, until the same questions sounded like prayers that nobody believed would be answered. The detectives had a board, the kind you see in crime dramas, but this one wasn't dramatic. It wasn't neat. It was crowded, cluttered, and ugly with reality. Photos, timelines, maps of the street with circles drawn around every driveway. A list of names that kept growing, then shrinking, then growing again as old leads resurfaced and new tips arrived like bottles tossed into a sea. They pinned Elena's routine to the board like it was a set of tracks, hoping the train of that night had to have followed them. Work. Home. Quick errands. Phone call. Lights out. Door opens. Darkness. And then the part nobody could pin down, the part that made every detective's jaw tighten, the moment the normal ended and the nightmare began. They started with the obvious, because the obvious is where you can work. The ex-boyfriend. The co-worker. The neighbor who knew her schedule too well. The guy at the gym who always watched her for a second too long. The family friend who showed up to the funeral with eyes too dry and questions too eager. Each one was pulled into an interview room with beige walls and a humming vent, each one was asked to account for hours that had passed years ago but felt like yesterday, each one was measured for the tiny tremors that reveal lies. The detectives watched hands, not faces. Hands tell the truth first. Fingers tapping. A thumb rubbing the same spot on a knuckle until the skin went pale. A sudden stillness that didn't feel calm, it felt controlled. Alibis were offered like receipts. I was at home. I was with my sister. I was out of town. I fell asleep. The problem with the night is that it's forgiving. Night swallows details. Night lets people be alone without raising alarms. Night lets you disappear for an hour and come back without anyone noticing. In 2001, there were fewer digital footprints. No constant GPS trail. No doorbell cameras catching the shape of a shadow at 12:14 a.m. There were credit card transactions, sure, and cell towers that could hint at location, but hints aren't handcuffs. Hints are smoke, and smoke can drift. They chased the call at 9:17 p.m. because it was the last crisp timestamp in a fog of estimates. 39 seconds. A short burst of contact that looked insignificant until you stared at it long enough. Investigators pulled the number. It wasn't a family line. It wasn't a close friend listed in her phone book. It was registered to a prepaid account, common enough, but common doesn't mean innocent. They went to the store where it had been purchased, dug through old records, asked clerks to remember a face from months ago. Nothing stuck. The receipt trail ended like a road swallowed by woods. Still, the detectives circled it again and again, because in a case like this you learn to love the smallest things. The small things don't lie as often. The small things don't panic. The small things just sit there, waiting to be understood. The witness with insomnia, the one who heard the idling car and the soft door close, became a central thread. Detectives returned to that person repeatedly, asking them to replay the night like a tape. What did the engine sound like? Was it a sedan? An SUV? Did the car accelerate hard or pull away gently? Did the voice outside sound male or female? Young or old? Angry or calm? The witness tried, truly tried, but memory is a cruel tool. The harder you grip it, the more it bends. Each retelling changed the edges. At first it was a car. Then it was a dark car. Then it was maybe a dark blue car. Then it was, I think it had a louder muffler. The voice was low, then maybe two voices, then I'm not sure. The detectives didn't blame them. They needed them anyway. They needed anything. The crime scene itself had offered a few hard facts, and those became sacred. The absence of forced entry. The lack of rummaging. The way the house seemed disturbed only in a narrow corridor of action, as if the intruder had moved through it with purpose, avoiding unnecessary contact. That suggested familiarity. Or discipline. Or both. It suggested someone who didn't arrive on impulse. Someone who knew what they were doing. Someone who understood that every step leaves a signature. And then there was the DNA. The technicians had pulled it from places that made sense and places that didn't. Under a fingernail. A smear on fabric. A trace where skin had touched something in the struggle. It wasn't enough to paint a portrait, but it was enough to build a profile. A string of markers that, in the right database, could light up like a flare. Detectives entered it. They waited. Nothing. They expanded the search. Still nothing. The killer, if that DNA belonged to the killer, was not in the system. No prior convictions, or no arrests, or they were careful enough to avoid leaving that kind of trail. A clean ghost. For the community, DNA was supposed to be the silver bullet. For the detectives, it was a locked door with a keyhole that led to nothing. They tried to keep the family's hope alive without feeding it lies. They said the case was active. They said they were working leads. They said they would not stop. But the unspoken truth sat behind every press conference like a second microphone: we don't have the name. We don't have the hands that did it. We have evidence that points nowhere. As the first year rolled into the second, tips slowed, then spiked, then slowed again. People are strange under pressure. Some want attention. Some want revenge. Some want to believe they can solve a tragedy by inserting themselves into it. A woman called to say she had seen Elena arguing with a man at a grocery store weeks earlier, swore she could pick him out of a lineup. They tracked the store's schedule, found the cashier, found nothing. A man claimed his cousin confessed at a family barbecue, drunk and trembling, said he did something terrible in Chevy Chase. The cousin had been in another state, documented, verified. A teenager posted online about knowing who did it and sent the neighborhood into a frenzy until detectives discovered it was a cruel lie meant to impress friends. But one lead lingered, heavy and persistent, because it felt too plausible to ignore. Elena had been in a transitional point in her life, professional changes, new responsibilities, new circles. A colleague mentioned she'd seemed distracted in the weeks before her death, not afraid exactly, but alert, like someone who'd started checking locks twice. That detail hit detectives hard. Because fear isn't always dramatic. Sometimes fear is small. Fear is a glance over your shoulder in a parking lot. Fear is walking a little faster to your car. Fear is telling a friend, nothing's wrong, while your voice tries to convince you. Detectives pressed for more. Had she said why? Had she mentioned someone bothering her? Had she named anyone? The colleague hesitated, then offered something thin. Elena had mentioned a weird message, maybe a voicemail, maybe a note. Not a threat. Not explicit. Just unsettling. Like someone knew where she would be. Like someone wanted her to know they knew. They pulled her voicemail records. They searched her desk at work again. They revisited her email archives, combing for the digital equivalent of a fingerprint. And what they found wasn't a confession, wasn't a smoking gun, but it was enough to change the direction of the wind, a handful of brief emails from an address that didn't correspond to any known contact, written in a tone that hovered between familiarity and intrusion. Not overtly threatening, but too personal, too sure. References to places she'd been. Comments on things she'd done. A sense of watching without saying the word watching. The kind of communication that can be brushed off as odd, until you're lying dead in your own home and detectives are reading it like scripture. They traced the email address. It routed through public terminals. Libraries. Internet cafes. Places where anonymity was cheap. The people who worked there didn't remember faces. The surveillance systems, if they existed, didn't store footage for years. Again, the trail stopped, a road swallowed by woods. But now the case had a new scent, stalking. Obsession. An invisible presence that might have been in Elena's orbit longer than anyone knew. Detectives began to ask a different kind of question, one that made the community's skin crawl. Who watched her? Who knew her routine? Who knew she parked in that driveway at that hour? Who knew she lived alone? The list expanded beyond friends and family into the blurry perimeter of acquaintances, service workers, delivery drivers, contractors, people who had been inside the house for legitimate reasons. Someone who fixed a leak. Someone who installed something. Someone who came for routine maintenance. The house had seen strangers, just not the kind who kicked down doors. In a town where people paid others to do things for them, access was a commodity. Keys could be copied. Schedules could be learned. Trust could be exploited. They pulled records from companies. They asked who had been scheduled at Elena's address. They asked who had been terminated for misconduct, who had complaints, who had vanished from payroll suddenly. They pored over lists until their eyes blurred. The work was brutal because it was endless and because every false lead took time away from the real one, wherever it was hiding. Still, they pushed, because the alternative was surrender, and surrender was not allowed to have a place at the table. The family's grief turned into a different shape, less raw, more sharp. They wanted progress. They wanted action. They wanted the feeling that Elena's death mattered as much to the system as it did to them. They put up billboards. They offered rewards. They appeared on local news, their voices controlled, their faces taut, holding photos of Elena as if the image itself could pull the truth out of hiding. A mother looked into the camera and said, "Someone knows." A father said, "They are walking free." Those words didn't just target the killer. They targeted the silence. They targeted the community. They targeted the secret sitting in someone's throat, unspoken. And the community felt it. People started looking at each other differently, not with open accusation, but with a new awareness of possibility. The friendly neighbor could be someone else behind closed doors. The charming man at the fundraiser could be harboring a darker story. The person who offered help with a smile could be offering cover. Trust, once cracked, doesn't repair cleanly. It leaves seams. It leaves weak points. It leaves people scanning crowds for faces that don't belong. Years passed, and the case shifted into that haunting category, cold case. A phrase that sounds clinical, but feels like abandonment. The file didn't stop existing, it just stopped being the loudest thing in the room. Detectives got new assignments. New murders demanded immediate answers. New tragedies arrived like storms. Elena's case became a box on a shelf, pulled down in bursts when a lead surfaced, then returned when it went stale. But even on the shelf, it pressed on people's minds like weight. And then the technology changed. New databases. Better methods. The rise of genetic genealogy, the idea that a person could be found not because they had been arrested before, but because a distant relative had mailed their DNA to a consumer site to learn about heritage and discovered, by accident, that bloodlines can betray secrets. The concept felt like science fiction, and for detectives, it felt like air after years underwater. Someone in the department, newer, younger, impatient with the idea of unsolvable, asked to reopen Elena's case with fresh eyes. They retested evidence with modern techniques, pulled profiles that had been too weak before, clarified markers that used to be muddy. And as the lab reports came back, the DNA that had once been a locked door started to look more like a map. Not a full map. Not a straight route. But something with edges. Something with direction. When the rumor returned, Chevy Chase 2001 cold case cracked, it wasn't just because detectives wanted good press. It was because something finally moved. A partial match. A genealogical hit. A family tree branching into names. A slow narrowing of possibility into a person-shaped silhouette. The kind of development that makes a room go silent, because everyone understands what it could mean. Everyone understands what it might cost. And somewhere, in the quiet of a house that still looked too perfect to hold a secret, someone who had lived for years under the cover of ordinary life might have felt the first tremor of fear, the first crack in the ice beneath their feet, the faint sound of the past rising up behind them, closer now, breathing down their neck like a headline returning to finish the sentence. The lab didn't deliver answers with a trumpet blast, it delivered them the way a predator moves, quiet, patient, inevitable, slipping through cracks nobody noticed until it was already inside. A new report slid onto a detective's desk with a barcode and a cold line of text, partial profile upgraded, viability improved, comparison potential expanded. It wasn't poetry. It wasn't justice. It was a door handle warming under a gloved hand. In the fluorescent hum of the unit, someone read it twice, then a third time, because for years the case had been a wall. Now it was a wall with a seam. They pulled the old evidence from storage like exhuming a body. Boxes stamped with dates, initials, chain of custody stickers stacked like scars. The smell of cardboard, tape, and sealed plastic, time preserved. Gloves snapped on. Mask straps tightened. Every movement felt ceremonial, because you don't handle a dead woman's last traces like ordinary paperwork, not when her family still calls every anniversary, not when a whole street still flinches at unfamiliar cars. They laid items out under bright lamps, fabric, swabs, tiny fragments collected from a life that ended in violence. The smallest things looked enormous under that light. A single hair might as well have been a confession. A single smear might as well have been a name. The technician spoke in careful terms, the way you do when you're about to hand someone hope and you don't want it to break in their fingers. The new techniques could pull signal from noise. Mixed samples could be untangled. Degraded DNA could be coaxed into clarity. And then came the word that always changes the room, genealogy. Not the old databases of criminals and arrestees. Not the waiting game for someone to get caught for something else. Genealogy meant going sideways, not forward, finding relatives, building family trees, turning anonymous markers into bloodlines. The detective assigned to the reopen, let's call him Marlowe, because he had that kind of last name, the kind that sounds like cigarette smoke and stubbornness, had worked enough cases to distrust miracles. But he also knew this: technology doesn't feel guilt. It doesn't hesitate. It doesn't get tired. It just keeps improving, and improvement has a way of making old lies nervous. Marlowe sat with analysts and watched them do what felt like witchcraft in an office chair, uploading the profile, comparing, filtering, narrowing. The screen displayed columns of numbers and probabilities, but behind those numbers were lives, people who went to work, paid taxes, raised kids, never imagining their DNA could be a loose thread that pulled a hidden sweater apart. The first hit wasn't a hit, not the way TV teaches people to expect. It was a whisper. A partial match to a distant relative, so distant it sounded absurd at first, third cousin, maybe fourth, something like that. A person who had mailed saliva into a tube for fun, for ancestry, for curiosity, and now unknowingly stood at the edge of a homicide from years ago. The analysts built outward, tracing shared segments, triangulating, sorting branches. They pulled public records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, obituaries, social media profiles with smiling family photos that didn't know what shadows were approaching. It became a long, obsessive exercise in patience, the kind that makes you forget to eat, the kind that turns nights into mornings without noticing. Names appeared. Then more names. Then too many names. The tree grew like something alive, spreading across the wall on printouts taped together, a monstrous family diagram that looked like a conspiracy map. Every branch held potential. Every branch held a dead end. The analysts marked people who fit the basic parameters: male, right age range, plausible location history, no clear alibi anchored in documented fact. The list narrowed. Then narrowed again. Chevy Chase was wealthy, transient in a polished way. People came and went for jobs, for schools, for contracts. The killer could have been local. The killer could have been passing through. The killer could have lived 10 minutes away and never stepped into the neighborhood again after that night. What made the case bite harder was the way the old evidence began to talk with the new. One of the swabs, once too compromised to be useful, now yielded a clearer profile. It didn't match anyone in the criminal database, but it matched the genealogical web, tightening the net around a particular branch. A surname surfaced repeatedly, a name that appeared in county records like a recurring stain. The analysts circled it. They looked for people connected to that line who had been in the area in 2001. They started building a short list of candidates, each one a quiet bomb. Marlowe watched the list shrink until it became a handful of names, then 3, then 2. And then there was one. A man who had lived close enough. A man who had worked close enough. A man whose past lined up like teeth in a zipper with Elena's final months. Not a drifter. Not a masked stranger. Someone ordinary enough to blend into the world without leaving ripples. Married at one point, divorced later. A job that put him in and out of neighborhoods like Chevy Chase without anyone questioning it. A history that didn't scream violence on paper, which was exactly the kind of history that lets violence hide. The next step was the one that makes hearts pound, the step between theory and accusation. You don't arrest someone because an algorithm points to a family tree. You arrest someone because you can prove, in a courtroom, that the DNA belongs to them, not to some cousin, not to some brother, not to some statistical ghost. You need a direct sample. You need the match so clean it feels like fate. And that's when the surveillance began. It wasn't dramatic. No helicopters. No men in trench coats. It was vehicles parked at a distance, rotating shifts, long hours of watching a man live. A man who walked out of a house in the morning and put a travel mug in a cup holder like any other commuter. A man who waved at neighbors. A man who carried groceries. A man who laughed in a driveway, his posture relaxed, his face unburdened. The detectives watched him and felt that familiar nausea, the disconnect between what a person looks like and what a person might have done. They watched him scratch his nose, adjust his jacket, check his phone, and they wondered if those hands had once closed around another person's life. They tracked his routine. Work. Lunch spots. Gas station stops. The places where he left pieces of himself behind without thinking. Cigarette butts. Coffee cups. Plastic utensils. A napkin wiped across a mouth. The modern world is full of discarded DNA, and the detectives knew it. They just had to collect it legally, cleanly, in a way that wouldn't collapse under a defense attorney's glare. One evening, he tossed a fast food cup into a public trash can outside a strip mall. The detective waited until he walked away, waited until the distance was safe, then moved in with a gloved hand and retrieved it like it was a grenade. The cup went into a sealed bag. The bag went into a cooler. The cooler went to the lab like a sacred offering. When the results came back, the room didn't celebrate. It didn't erupt. It went silent, because confirmation doesn't feel like victory at first, it feels like impact. The DNA on the cup matched the DNA from Elena's crime scene. A direct match. Not a whisper anymore. A voice. A fingerprint in blood. A connection that ran like a wire across decades. The case that had been a wall was now a door kicked open by science, and behind that door was a living man who had been free for years. Marlowe looked at the report and felt the weight of it settle into his bones. He thought about Elena's mother, how she used to call with a voice that tried to stay polite, asking if there was any news. He thought about the street in Chevy Chase, the neighbor who found the door ajar and carried that image in their mind like a curse. He thought about all the nights that had passed since 2001, all the ordinary dinners, all the vacations, all the holidays this man had lived through while Elena's family sat in a permanent winter. The difference between those two lives was the space between justice delayed and justice denied. A warrant was drafted. The language was surgical, built from facts and probability tightened into certainty. Judges don't sign on emotion. They sign on evidence. The warrant described the match, the chain of custody, the technology, the reason to believe this man's DNA would link him to the scene beyond doubt. When the judge's pen hit paper, it sounded small. But the sound mattered. It was the first official footstep of the past walking into the present. The arrest didn't happen in a dark alley. It happened in daylight, because reality loves to destroy the fantasy of drama. It happened in a parking lot outside a workplace, because investigators wanted control, witnesses, a clean capture. The suspect, let's call him Graham, walked toward his car with keys in his hand, thinking about nothing more dangerous than the rest of his day. Then unmarked vehicles moved in like a closing jaw. Doors opened. Commands snapped through the air. Hands went up. His face shifted from confusion to a tighter emotion, calculation, maybe. Surprise, definitely. Fear, finally. When they cuffed him, the metal clicked like punctuation. People nearby stared, phones rising, mouths hanging open. The shock spread instantly, because this wasn't a stranger in a hoodie dragged out of shadows. This was a man who looked like someone you'd pass in the grocery aisle without noticing. The community didn't just feel relief. It felt betrayal. Because if a man like that could be a killer, what did that say about the safety they'd rebuilt on top of old fear? At the station, the interview room was the same beige cage Elena's old suspects had sat in years before. But Graham's presence changed it. He didn't slouch like someone beaten by life. He sat upright. He asked for a lawyer quickly, which is a right, but it's also a signal. His eyes were steady, but his jaw worked subtly, chewing on something invisible. He didn't confess in a burst of remorse. He didn't collapse. He didn't scream innocence with wild eyes. He did something more unsettling. He controlled the narrative by refusing to give one. Outside that room, detectives pieced together the why, because even with DNA, juries want motive like they want oxygen. DNA says you were there. It doesn't say what you felt. It doesn't say what you wanted. It doesn't explain why Elena's life was selected for destruction. The investigators dug into Graham's history and found faint echoes of obsession, complaints from old co-workers about inappropriate attention, a pattern of hovering around women who didn't welcome it, nothing criminal on paper, just a trail of discomfort that had been shrugged off as weird at the time. Weird is the word people use when they don't yet have a better one. Weird is the warning label nobody reads until the product explodes. They found he had been in Elena's orbit through a service connection, work done near her home months before the murder, legitimate reason to be in the neighborhood, to see the house, to learn the layout, to observe routines without appearing predatory. It wasn't proof by itself. It was context. It was the kind of context that makes the stomach turn, because it means the danger didn't arrive from outside the community. It slid in through the cracks of daily life, wearing a uniform, carrying tools, smiling politely. They also found something darker, a notebook, seized with a warrant, filled with dates and addresses, scribbles that looked like reminders, like someone cataloguing the world. Some entries were innocuous. Some were not. One line, half a sentence, stood out like a bruise. A reference to E and Chevy Chase. Not a confession, not explicit, but too close to coincidence to ignore. The detectives felt the case tighten again. The story they'd been chasing for years suddenly had gravity. Suddenly, Elena's unease in those last weeks made sense. The weird messages. The sense of being watched. The way fear can begin as a shadow and only later reveal the body casting it. News broke fast. It always does. The headline hit screens like an electric shock: Chevy Chase 2001 cold case cracked. People who had moved away years ago texted each other in disbelief. Neighbors who had lived on that street in 2001 sat at kitchen tables and stared at the words until they blurred. Elena's family got the call from Marlowe, and for a moment, hope and pain collided so violently it was hard to breathe. But here's the thing about headlines: they sell endings, and reality rarely delivers them clean. The defense moved quickly, because time favors the accused when decades have passed. They challenged the genealogy process. They questioned privacy. They attacked chain of custody. They suggested contamination, secondary transfer, laboratory error. They painted science as uncertain and investigators as desperate. They asked jurors, future jurors, to believe that a man's DNA could land in a crime scene without him being the killer. They raised the possibility of consensual contact, of an encounter nobody knew about, of an explanation that would keep the evidence from becoming a noose. And that's when the community's relief began to sour into something else. Because cracked sounded final. Cracked sounded like the monster had been named and caged. But the case wasn't finished. Not yet. A match is not a verdict. An arrest is not a conclusion. It's the beginning of the last fight, and the last fight is the one where truth is dragged through procedure, where grief is cross-examined, where the past is made to testify under oath. Elena's name returned to the news, and with it, the old images, the old fear. Reporters showed the house, the street, the hedges still trimmed, the porch light still hanging. They interviewed neighbors who spoke in careful sentences, as if any wrong word might summon the nightmare again. They speculated about motive, about obsession, about how someone could hide for so long. They asked the question that always makes people angry because it has no good answer: how did he live all these years without being caught? And somewhere in the machinery of the justice system, the case that had been a cold file became hot again, heated by science, by outrage, by the pressure of a community that wanted an ending more than it wanted comfort. Yet beneath that pressure, the story still held its deepest, ugliest mystery, the one no lab could quantify: what happened inside that house when the door opened, when Elena realized that whatever stood in front of her wasn't leaving, when the quiet of Chevy Chase turned into a weapon, and the night that had hidden everything began to demand its price. The moment the cuffs clicked, the town wanted to exhale, wanted to believe the nightmare had finally been boxed up and labeled, wanted to staple a clean ending onto a story that had rotted for decades in the dark. But endings don't belong to headlines, they belong to courtrooms, and courtrooms don't care what a community needs. They care what a jury can be made to believe while 12 strangers stare at the same evidence and hear two versions of the same night fight to the death. The arrest turned Chevy Chase into a live wire again. Reporters crouched behind hedges like hunters, camera lenses trained on driveways, neighbors learning the taste of being watched, and in the middle of it all the suspect, Graham, did something that felt like a second crime. He stayed calm. He stayed ordinary. He let his lawyer speak in a voice that sounded like clean glass, insisting the past was being rewritten with modern science and modern panic. That cracked headline was a marketing trick dressed up as justice, and the words didn't just defend him, they infected the case, because once doubt gets into the bloodstream it doesn't leave quietly. Marlowe knew the danger before anyone else did, because he'd seen it happen. He'd watched old cases revive and then collapse under the weight of time, watched juries recoil from uncertainty, watched defense teams slice decades-old evidence into confetti, and he could already feel the fault lines in Elena's file, the places where the truth was solid and the places where it was only assumed, only implied, only hoped. The DNA was the anchor, the kind of fact that doesn't blink, but anchors can drag you down if the rope is frayed, and the rope in this case was made of years, years of storage, years of transfers, years of changing procedures, different hands, different labs, different standards, all of it waiting for a skilled attorney to stand in front of a jury and say, softly, dangerously, "Are you sure?" The first hearing was procedural on paper and seismic in the air, a courtroom filled with people who hadn't seen each other since the funeral, old neighbors sitting stiffly, Elena's family gathered like survivors of a storm, eyes fixed on the man accused of ending her life, and when Graham entered, not in a cage but through a side door, suit pressed, hair neat, the shock in the room wasn't rage, it was recognition of how human monsters look when they are not wearing a mask. The prosecutor spoke about science, about progress, about the cruel patience of cold cases and the promise of modern tools, and the defense stood up and asked a question that landed like a blade on a table. If this case was so clear, why had it taken 20 years, and why were the answers arriving only now, when memories are dead and witnesses are gone and the past can't defend itself? They attacked genealogy first, not because it was illegal, but because it was unfamiliar, and unfamiliar things scare jurors more than bad things do. They painted it as a fishing expedition through private lives, a digital dragnet built on people who never consented to become part of a murder case, cousins and second cousins and strangers connected only by the geometry of blood. They used words like probability and assumption and interpretation. They made it sound less like science and more like fortune-telling dressed in lab coats. The prosecution answered with policy, procedure, warrants, the careful steps taken to confirm the match through direct sampling, but the defense didn't need to win the argument, not yet. They only needed to plant a seed of discomfort, because discomfort grows into doubt, and doubt is the oxygen of acquittal. Then they moved to the evidence itself, the physical remnants of the night Elena died, and suddenly every sealed bag and every label mattered like scripture. Chain of custody. Temperature logs. Storage conditions. Who opened what, when, and why? They requested records that hadn't been thought about in years. They asked for names of technicians who had retired, moved, died, and the prosecution had to answer with paper, always paper, because in court paper is memory. They found small inconsistencies, the way sharks find blood, an evidence log with a missing initial, a date written in a hurried hand that could be read two ways, a notation that didn't specify whether a seal was retaped after testing, tiny human errors that mean nothing in real life and everything in a courtroom, because jurors don't measure truth in microscopes, they measure it in trust. The worst moment came when the defense raised secondary transfer, a phrase that sounded like an excuse until it didn't. DNA, they said, can travel. It can move from person to object to person without direct contact. A handshake, a shared surface, a borrowed tool, a casual brush in a crowded place. They suggested Graham could have been in Elena's home for legitimate reasons months earlier through his work, leaving DNA behind innocently, and that something in the chaos of that fatal night could have picked it up and smeared it into the crime scene. They suggested the DNA didn't prove he killed her, only that his biological signature existed in her world at some point, which was not the same thing. In the back rows, people shifted uncomfortably, because the argument was slick, and slick arguments have a way of making the truth feel slippery. Marlowe listened and felt the cold return, not because he believed Graham was innocent, but because he knew what the defense was doing, turning certainty into a question mark, turning the sharp point of the case into a blur. To counter it, the prosecution needed story, not just data, motive, and opportunity welded to the DNA so tightly that a juror couldn't separate them without tearing the whole thing apart. That meant they had to reopen Elena's life in public, to expose her routines, her emails, her fear, to drag her memory into cross-examination, and that was its own violence. They brought up the weird messages again, the emails that felt like someone leaning too close, the comments that seemed to know her schedule, the sense of being watched. The prosecution hinted at obsession. The defense shrugged and called them misinterpretations, normal workplace annoyance inflated by tragedy. When the notebook was mentioned, the scribbles, the initials, the defense called it meaningless, the kind of vague notes anyone might make, the kind of thing that looks sinister only after an accusation. Every time the prosecution tried to draw a line, the defense tried to smudge it. And then came the part that made the room feel smaller, the holes that time had carved into the case like rot into wood. The witness with insomnia, still alive, older now, voice thinner, was called to the stand, and the courtroom watched a person struggle with memory under oath, watched them try to pin down a sound from 20 years ago. The defense was gentle at first, almost kind, letting the witness explain uncertainty, then tightening the grip. How sure are you it was midnight? How sure are you it was that street? How sure are you it was a man's voice? How sure are you it wasn't a television? How sure are you it wasn't a car passing by? Each question didn't need to prove the witness wrong, it only needed to prove the witness human, and human memory is a weak foundation to build a verdict on. Another witness, a colleague who had talked about Elena's unease, took the stand and spoke about her double-checking locks, her distracted look, her mention of odd messages. The defense asked why none of this was reported with urgency back then. Why no police call about stalking? Why no restraining order? Why no formal complaint? The colleague looked trapped, because the honest answer was the ugliest one: people don't always recognize danger until it has teeth, and the world teaches women to swallow discomfort like it's normal, like it's the cost of moving through life. In the courtroom, that truth became a weakness the defense could exploit. Then the defense unveiled its favorite weapon, the alternative suspect, the ghost they could point at so jurors wouldn't have to look directly at Graham. They brought up an old lead from 2001, a man Elena had briefly dated, someone with a temper, someone who had argued with her in public, someone the police had interviewed and cleared based on a shaky alibi and lack of evidence. The defense suggested police tunnel vision now, desperate to close the file, had ignored the obvious in favor of a scientific shortcut. They hinted at bias: once you have a suspect, you start seeing everything through that lens. Marlowe wanted to stand up and shout, because he knew the alternative suspect had been combed over until nothing remained, but in court what detectives know isn't what matters, what they can prove is what matters, and proving a negative is like trying to hold smoke. Behind the scenes, pressure built like a storm line. Elena's family wanted certainty so badly it felt like hunger. The community wanted reassurance, wanted the idea that the threat had been living among them and was now removed. The police department wanted closure for a case that had haunted it through multiple administrations. The prosecution wanted a conviction because anything else would look like failure, and failures in cold cases echo louder than failures in fresh ones, because you don't get many second chances after 2 decades. Everyone wanted the same thing, but they wanted it for different reasons, and those reasons pulled the case in different directions. As the trial date approached, the defense filed motion after motion, seeking to exclude genealogy evidence, seeking to limit what the jury could hear, seeking to paint the DNA collection from the discarded cup as an unlawful search, a violation, a shortcut. The judge listened, expression carved from stone, and rulings came down like slow drops of water, some for the prosecution, some for the defense. The genealogy method might be mentioned in general but not explained in depth. Certain details about the crime scene would be kept from the public. Certain prior behaviors alleged in Graham's past would be considered prejudicial and kept out. Each ruling wasn't just a legal decision, it was a reshaping of the story, a change in what the jury would be allowed to see. And then, just when everyone thought the narrative was tightening into certainty, something happened that felt like the floor shifting. A lab supervisor reviewing old files flagged a discrepancy in the original 2001 testing notes, nothing dramatic, not contamination confirmed, not profile invalid, but a technical ambiguity about whether a particular sample had been a mixture of multiple contributors, and whether the later reanalysis had fully separated them or interpreted them under newer thresholds. It was the kind of nuance that means everything to scientists and sounds like gibberish to jurors, which is exactly why it was dangerous. The defense seized it like a trophy. They demanded hearings. They demanded expert testimony. They demanded to retest, to re-review, to slow the whole machine down until it overheated. The prosecution countered with their own experts, voices steady, explaining statistical strength, explaining how the direct match from the cup confirmed the profile, explaining that mixtures are common and interpretable and that the match remains strong. But the more experts explain, the more jurors feel like they're being asked to take it on faith, and faith is fragile in a murder trial. Marlowe sat in the back, jaw clenched, watching science become a battlefield of language, watching truth get translated into persuasion. Outside the courthouse, the cameras waited like vultures. Every break brought commentary. Every motion became a headline. The phrase, "cold case cracked," kept reappearing, but now it felt less like triumph and more like propaganda, because the case wasn't cracking into answers, it was cracking into fragments, science versus doubt, grief versus procedure, public hunger versus legal rigor. The community's shock evolved into exhaustion, and exhaustion is where mistakes breed. Elena's family started to feel the second trauma, the one nobody warns you about. When justice finally moves, it moves through your life like a bulldozer. Old photos were shown in court. Private emails were read aloud. Her habits, her friendships, her final day, all turned into exhibits. Her mother sat through arguments about whether her daughter's fear was objective enough to matter. Her father heard strangers debate her death like it was an equation. Friends who had kept her memory intact now watched it get dissected, and they realized closure has a price, and sometimes the price is your last illusion of privacy. And Graham, still calm, became a symbol, not just a person. To some, he was a monster hiding in plain sight. To others, he was a man at risk of being railroaded by trendy science and institutional pride. The case split people who had once shared a street and believed they were on the same side. Conversations at dinner parties turned brittle. Online forums lit up with theories. People chose versions of reality the way they choose teams, and in the middle of that noise, the true story of that night grew harder to hear. Because the night itself remained stubbornly silent. No confession. No clear eyewitness. No weapon recovered. No dramatic piece of evidence like a bloody shirt in a drawer. Just DNA and circumstantial threads and the terrifying idea that someone could enter a home without forcing a door, that violence could happen without a scream loud enough to wake neighbors, that the suburbs' polished quiet could swallow a death and then keep swallowing it for years. The defense's favorite line became a hook they dragged through every hearing: where is the rest? Where is the motive that fits like a key? Where is the proof he was there that night, not just sometime in his life? Where is the video, the witness, the confession? Where is the rest of the story? And the prosecution's answer, spoken without poetry, was the answer that makes juries uncomfortable because it sounds too simple for tragedy. Sometimes the rest is gone, sometimes time eats it, sometimes killers survive because the world forgets details, and sometimes science is the only thing that doesn't forget. The judge finally set a firm date. The courtroom calendar became a countdown. Elena's family marked it like a holiday they never wanted, a day that might finally deliver a verdict or might deliver a new kind of darkness, the possibility that even with a match, even with an arrest, even with 2 decades of waiting, the system could still fail to name the killer in a way that stuck. Marlowe stood in his office late one night staring at the evidence photos, the timeline, the genealogical chart now folded into a case file like a map back to hell, and he felt that old pressure in his chest, the pressure that comes from knowing you're close to something but not knowing whether close is enough. Because in the end, a cold case doesn't just haunt you with what happened, it haunts you with what didn't. The scream nobody heard. The footprint nobody saw. The moment Elena realized the door had opened to the wrong person. The seconds that weren't recorded. The minutes that didn't leave a trace. And as the courthouse lights shut off and the town drifted into another ordinary night, one thought pressed itself into every shadow: what if the headline was premature? What if cracked was just another word for almost? And what if, after all this time, the truth was still out there, breathing quietly, waiting for the world to look away again? The day jury selection began, Chevy Chase didn't feel like a suburb, it felt like a witness stand, every driveway a mouth clamped shut, every porch a stage light waiting to expose whoever stepped into it, and the courthouse downtown pulsed with the kind of quiet violence you only get when everyone in the room knows someone's life is about to be measured in words. The air outside the building was winter-thin again, a cold that crawled under coats and into bones, and the reporters lined up like they were waiting for a concert, not a reckoning. Elena's family arrived early, not because they wanted to be first, but because being late felt like disrespecting her twice, and they moved with the stiff precision of people who had practiced grief in public for too long. Marlowe stood near a pillar and watched them, watched the mother's hands clasped so tightly the knuckles blanched, watched the father's jaw set like a locked door, watched a sister or cousin, someone close, stare straight ahead as if the world might collapse if she blinked at the wrong time, and then he saw Graham escorted in and the atmosphere changed, because shock doesn't always announce itself with noise, sometimes it just drains the oxygen out of the room. He looked like nothing. That was the horror of it. He looked like any man who has memorized how to appear harmless. Suit. Tie. Controlled posture. A face trained into neutrality. If you passed him on the street you'd never turn your head, never warn your friend, never tighten your grip on your keys. And yet the DNA report sat in Marlowe's mind like a brand, the crime scene and this man, linked by biology, linked by contact, linked by something that refused to be coincidence no matter how many motions the defense filed. Still, court wasn't about what Marlowe believed. It was about what 12 strangers could be persuaded to believe without feeling tricked, without feeling used, without feeling like science was being wielded like a weapon against common sense. The prosecution laid out their strategy like building a bridge across a gorge, anchor points first, then span. They couldn't show the jury everything. The judge had sliced parts of the story away, worried about prejudice, about confusion, about turning the trial into a seminar on genetics. So the prosecution focused on what jurors understand instinctively: presence, opportunity, pattern. They would tell the jury Elena was afraid before she died. They would show those strange messages, the subtle creep of someone encroaching on her life. They would show Graham's access to neighborhoods like hers, his ability to move through spaces without triggering alarm. And then they would deliver the core punch: his DNA was at the scene, and his DNA came from his body, and his body had no innocent reason to be there at the moment Elena's life was taken. The defense planned to turn that bridge into a tightrope. They would make the jury feel the wind. They would make every step look risky. They would hammer one theme until it felt like truth, reasonable doubt. They didn't need an alternate narrative that made perfect sense. They only needed to make the prosecution's narrative feel incomplete, fragile, too dependent on scientific interpretation and too thin on human corroboration. They would emphasize what was missing until the absence felt louder than the evidence. No weapon. No confession. No eyewitness who saw Graham enter or leave. No surveillance footage. No definitive motive. Just DNA and a story built around it like a frame around a painting you can't fully see. Jury selection dragged like a slow bleed. People were questioned about their trust in science, their beliefs about privacy, their knowledge of the case. Some had heard rumors. Some remembered old news clips. Some had lived in the area back then and carried a private fear they'd never admitted out loud. The defense wanted jurors suspicious of government and skeptical of labs. The prosecution wanted jurors open to technology and sensitive to the realities of stalking and violence. Each side used the same polite words: impartial, fair-minded, but behind the politeness was calculation, because trials are chess games played with human beings as pieces. When opening statements finally arrived, the courtroom felt like it had been holding its breath for years and was about to inhale pain. The prosecutor stood, voice steady, and spoke about December 2001, about a quiet street in Chevy Chase where a woman was killed in her own home, about the investigation that had run out of footprints but not out of determination. The prosecutor didn't overpromise. They didn't say they would explain every second of that night. They said something more dangerous and more honest: the killer thought time would protect him, but time doesn't erase biology, and science has a long memory. Then they said Graham's name, and Elena's mother flinched as if the name itself had edges. The defense rose next, smooth as oil, and began with a sentence that sounded like a moral lesson: people want closure so badly they will accept a story that feels satisfying even if it isn't true. They warned the jury about modern methods applied to old evidence, about contamination, about mixed samples, about how DNA can be misinterpreted, how genealogy can point in the wrong direction, how the state might be building a case backward, starting with a suspect and then forcing facts to fit. They used phrases like junk science, carefully, not too loud, just enough to make some jurors shift. And then they delivered their anchor: the state cannot prove what happened in that house beyond speculation. If you cannot prove the how and the why, the defense implied, you cannot prove the who. The first witnesses were groundwork, the architecture of context. A neighbor described finding the door ajar, the wrongness, the chill. A responding officer described the scene, too tidy, too controlled, too quiet. A crime scene tech described collecting evidence, the methodical process, the preservation. It all sounded clean until it didn't, because the defense cross-examined with a scalpel, searching for any moment where procedure might have slipped. Did you change gloves between items? How many people entered the scene? Was the house secured immediately? Was every officer logged? Were you trained on mixed DNA interpretation in 2001? The witnesses answered as best they could, but time had eroded confidence. People don't remember routine the way they remember trauma, and defense attorneys know that. Then the prosecution brought Elena back into the room, not as a body, but as a person, and the courtroom tightened. Friends spoke about her habits, her kindness, her reliability. A colleague spoke about her unease, how she'd seemed jumpy, how she'd asked someone to walk with her to her car once, how she'd laughed it off afterward as if embarrassment was safer than truth. The defense pressed hard. Why no report? Why no alarm? Why no documented stalking complaint? The witness's face reddened, and in that redness lived a brutal reality. The world teaches you to endure discomfort until it becomes disaster. When the messages were introduced, the jury leaned in. They weren't explicit threats. They weren't cinematic. That was what made them sickening. A phrase referencing where she'd been. A comment about her schedule. A casual intimacy that didn't belong. The prosecutor framed them as predatory attention, a slow tightening of a net. The defense framed them as ambiguous, potentially harmless, potentially misread through the lens of tragedy. The judge instructed jurors to consider them carefully, and the jurors did what jurors do. They tried to picture the tone, tried to hear a voice in text, tried to decide whether discomfort counts as danger. The lab testimony was where the trial turned from human story into technical battlefield. The prosecution's DNA analyst explained profiles, Loki, statistical strength. They spoke in plain language where possible, but the concepts were heavy. The analyst explained the original sample issues, the improvements made with modern testing, how the profile was strengthened, and then they explained the direct match from Graham's discarded cup, how that match wasn't probability, it was confirmation. They gave numbers that sounded like astronomical odds, the kind that make jurors' eyes widen. And for a moment, the courtroom felt like it had found firm ground. Then the defense attacked. They brought their own expert, someone with credentials that made jurors sit up straighter, and that expert didn't say the prosecution's lab was lying. That would have been too bold. They did something more effective. They said the interpretation of complex mixtures can vary, that threshold decisions matter, that analysts can disagree, that labs use different software and assumptions, that error is rare but not impossible. They pointed to the old discrepancy flagged in pre-trial hearings and pulled it into the light like a thread on a sweater. They spoke about confirmation bias, about how once investigators have a suspect, they may unconsciously interpret ambiguous data in ways that support that suspect. They said the discarded cup collection raises ethical questions. They said genealogy searches can lead to tunnel vision. The prosecutor cross-examined the defense expert with sharp, controlled force. They made the expert admit the direct match was strong. They made them admit that secondary transfer cannot easily explain DNA in certain locations, depending on what the jury was allowed to hear. They made them admit that multiple independent steps were taken to confirm the profile. But the damage wasn't in what the expert admitted, it was in what they introduced, the idea that science is not absolute, that numbers can be argued, that experts can disagree, that a lab can be wrong without being corrupt. As days passed, the jury's faces changed. At first, they looked alert. Then they looked tired. Trials exhaust the mind, and exhaustion is dangerous because it makes people want a simple answer. The prosecution tried to keep the story alive, to keep Elena's reality present, to make sure the case didn't collapse into a battle of lab coats. They emphasized the lack of forced entry. They suggested Elena likely let her killer in. They tied that to access, to familiarity, to Graham's ability to be near without suspicion. The defense countered by asking a question with teeth: if Elena let someone in, why assume it was Graham? Where is the evidence she knew him? Where is the witness who saw them interact? Where is a phone call between them, a message, a documented connection? The prosecution had hints, possibility through work overlap, proximity, pattern, but hints are not handcuffs. And then, on a Thursday afternoon when the courtroom felt like it was sinking into routine, the prosecution introduced a piece of evidence that made the room twitch, a timeline reconstruction based on phone tower data and workplace records. Not perfect, not GPS precise, but suggestive. Graham's phone had pinged a tower consistent with being in the general area during the window of Elena's death, and his work schedule had an unexplained gap. The prosecutor didn't call it proof. They called it alignment. The defense objected, called it junk inference, argued towers cover wide areas, argued phones can be left behind, argued gaps are normal. The judge allowed it with cautions. The jury wrote notes. Elena's father stared as if his eyes could force truth out of the air. The defense responded with a move designed to snap attention back toward doubt. They called an investigator from the original 2001 team and asked about alternative suspects. The investigator, older now, voice gravelly, described early leads, the ex-boyfriend, the angry acquaintance, the unknown car. The defense highlighted what hadn't been followed up vigorously, what had been ruled out quickly, what had gone cold. They implied that desperation to close the case now had rewritten the past, turning a cold file into a target for modern tools. The prosecutor countered by showing how those leads were pursued, how they stalled, how nothing matched the DNA. But again, the defense didn't need to prove the alternative suspect did it. They only needed to show that the universe of possibility was larger than one man. Every night, the news summarized the day like it was entertainment. Commentators debated science and doubt. Online, strangers argued fiercely about guilt and innocence, about privacy and justice, about whether genealogy was heroic or terrifying. Chevy Chase residents watched from living rooms and felt the old wound reopen. Some wanted to believe the system had finally done its job. Some were terrified the system was guessing. And in that split lived the true horror of an old unsolved killing dragged into modern light. You don't just reopen a case, you reopen a community's trust. Marlowe barely slept. He replayed the case in his mind like a film he couldn't stop. He thought about Elena's last evening, about the calm in her house, about the door opening. He thought about the moment she realized something was wrong, whether she recognized the face, whether she tried to negotiate, whether she fought. He thought about the lack of noise, the controlled violence. He thought about Graham's calm in court and wondered if calm was simply his natural state or if it was a skill learned in the aftermath of doing something unforgivable. He knew the jury could swing either way, and the idea of an acquittal felt like another murder, this time of certainty, of closure, of the promise he'd made to a family that had waited too long. In the final week, the prosecution delivered their closing like a hammer. They told the jury time had stolen many things, memories, witnesses, footage, but time had not stolen the DNA, and DNA doesn't appear by magic. They told the jury Elena didn't choose to become a case, didn't choose to become a lesson, didn't choose to die with her own door unlocked. They asked the jury to look past the defense's fog and see the through line, a man with no legitimate connection to Elena, a man whose DNA tied him to the scene, a man who lived freely while she lay in the ground. They didn't need to explain every detail of the night. They said they needed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Graham was there when it mattered. The defense closed with a quieter weapon, humility. They told the jury they didn't have to like Graham, didn't have to trust him, didn't have to feel sympathy. They only had to follow the law. The law demands certainty. The law demands more than suspicion wrapped in science. The law demands proof of guilt, not proof of possibility. They said the state's case was a story built on gaps, and in those gaps lies reasonable doubt. They reminded the jury of the missing weapon, the missing witness, the missing motive. They asked them to imagine a world where a man is convicted because his DNA traveled, because a lab made an interpretation, because people wanted closure. They told them that world should terrify them. When the jury filed out to deliberate, the courtroom felt suddenly hollow, like the building itself had been drained. Elena's mother stared at the door they disappeared through as if she could see the verdict already forming in the shadows. Graham sat still, hands folded, face unreadable, and for a moment Marlowe hated him not just for what he might have done, but for how he could sit there and let uncertainty torture everyone else. The judge told the room to remain available. The bailiff spoke in routine tones. And outside, the winter light faded early, leaving the courthouse wrapped in gray, while inside, behind a closed door, 12 people tried to decide if the headline was truth or temptation, if the past had finally been caught or if it had simply found a new way to hide. The jury room was a box with bad air and worse responsibility, 12 strangers sealed in together with coffee that tasted like cardboard and a stack of exhibits that felt heavier than any weapon, and outside that door time moved differently, stretching and snapping, because everyone waiting understood a single truth the system never says out loud: once a case reaches a jury, the facts stop being facts and become a story, and stories live or die on what people can stomach. The courthouse lights buzzed. The hallway smelled like disinfectant and old paper. Elena's family sat on a wooden bench with their coats still on as if removing them would tempt fate, and Graham sat at the defense table like he belonged there, not sweating, not pleading, not performing innocence, just letting silence do the work his lawyer had set it up to do. In the first hours of deliberation, there was still hope in the room, hope disguised as routine. Lawyers paced like caged animals. Reporters refreshed feeds, hungry for a word. Marlowe watched the jury door the way you watch a locked safe you're convinced contains something precious, and every time a clerk walked past, every time the latch clicked for some mundane reason, Elena's mother's head snapped up like an alarm. The prosecutor tried to sit still and failed. The defense attorney whispered calmly into Graham's ear, occasionally smiling in that professional way that doesn't reach the eyes. And the town waited, because the town had invested in that headline like it was a cure. The first note came late afternoon, delivered by the bailiff like a bad omen folded into paper. It wasn't a verdict. It was a question. The jury wanted clarification on DNA interpretation, on what exactly the match meant, on how mixed samples factored into the certainty. The judge called everyone back. The courtroom filled again. The question was read aloud, and you could feel the shift, like a boat rocking when weight moves to one side. The prosecution stood and answered carefully, sticking to what had been admitted, reiterating that the direct comparison from the discarded cup confirmed the profile. The defense stood and emphasized again that interpretation is not infallible, that science isn't a confession. The judge reread instructions, stern and neutral, reminding the jury that expert testimony is evidence, but it is for them to decide what weight it carries. Then the jury went back in, and the door shut, and the silence outside got louder. Night fell, and the courthouse became a lit aquarium. People on the outside could see silhouettes moving behind glass, could see the outline of a juror walking, gesturing, maybe arguing, but no sound came through. Elena's family finally left for a hotel nearby, but they didn't go far. They couldn't. Distance felt like abandonment. Marlowe went home and didn't sleep. He lay on his back staring at a ceiling fan that looked like blades in slow motion, hearing the defense's words loop, reasonable doubt, missing motive, missing witness, and he hated how clean those words sounded compared to the mess of a murdered life. Around dawn he was back at the courthouse, coffee burning his throat, jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. On the second day, another note. This one tighter, more dangerous. The jury wanted to review the phone tower timeline again. They wanted to see the messages again. They wanted the judge to redefine reasonable doubt. That last request landed like a slap, because it meant exactly what nobody wanted to admit: they were divided. They were negotiating with certainty, trying to understand how much uncertainty the law allows before it becomes a verdict. Elena's mother sat in the front row and stared forward, unmoving, and Marlowe realized she wasn't waiting for justice anymore. She was waiting to see whether the system would hurt her a second time. The judge responded to the notes, sent them back with the standard instruction, the same language courts have used for generations because no one has ever found a better way to describe the fog between truth and proof. The jury disappeared again. Outside, the prosecutor's team huddled around a legal pad, whispering strategy like they could still influence the outcome by sheer will. The defense attorney made small talk with a clerk, relaxed, because relaxed is what you look like when you feel momentum leaning your way. Graham remained mostly still, but Marlowe watched his hands, the faint flecks of fingers, the subtle tapping of a thumb. Not panic. Not grief. Calculation. A man counting time. Late that afternoon, the bailiff came out and said the words that turned stomachs cold. The jury was at an impasse. Everyone was called back in. The jury filed into the box, faces drawn, eyes avoiding contact as if looking at Elena's family would make their decision harder. The foreperson spoke with a voice that sounded exhausted. They had taken votes. They had argued. They had reviewed evidence. They could not reach unanimity. The judge asked if further deliberation might help. The foreperson hesitated, then said they did not believe so. The judge sent them back anyway with an instruction that was half encouragement, half pressure. Try again, listen to one another, do the work, because this is why you are here. The jury door closed, and the courtroom exhaled like a dying animal. That night, news outlets ran split-screen debates. Is DNA enough? Is genealogy reliable? Do we risk convicting the wrong person? The headlines metastasized. Chevy Chase residents watched and argued, and the case stopped being about Elena and became about what kind of future people wanted, one where science reaches back and grabs killers by the collar, or one where the past stays sealed because the risks of reopening it are too high. People who had never met Elena spoke about her like she was a concept. Marlowe sat alone in his office with the case file open and felt something close to rage, because Elena was not a concept. She was a woman who had locked her door and still died. On the third day, the verdict still didn't come. Another note arrived. Still deadlocked. The judge's face tightened in that controlled way judges have when they can see the collision coming and can't stop it. He called counsel to the bench. They whispered. The courtroom waited. Elena's father rubbed his forehead as if trying to erase the past through skin. Graham stared straight ahead, eyes slightly narrowed, as if he was listening to music only he could hear. The judge made the decision the law allows when reality refuses to cooperate. He declared a mistrial. The word hit the room like a punch. Not guilty would have been a clean wound. Guilty would have been a scar with purpose. Mistrial was something worse, an open fracture, a break that doesn't heal because nothing has been set in place. Elena's mother's shoulders shook once, just once, then she straightened, because grief teaches you how to become stone. The prosecutor's mouth tightened, face hardening into professional neutrality while their eyes betrayed devastation. The defense attorney placed a hand on Graham's shoulder, and it looked like comfort, but Marlowe saw it for what it was, a claim. A victory without a verdict. Graham was not free, at least not completely. The state could retry him. The judge set conditions. The legal machinery shifted into a new configuration, slower, heavier, more complicated. But in that moment, in that courtroom, the mistrial felt like the killer had slipped out of a net that had taken decades to weave, and the community felt the old fear surge back, sharp and humiliating. What if, cracked, had been nothing but a shiny word? Outside, reporters swarmed Elena's family. Microphones thrust forward like weapons. How do you feel? As if feeling could be summarized. Elena's father didn't answer. Elena's mother looked into a camera and said, quietly, we're still here, and that was all. Marlowe watched them leave through a side door, small and wounded under the weight of cameras, and he realized the system's cruelty isn't only in what it fails to do, it's in how it forces the living to perform their suffering while it debates the dead. The prosecutor's office announced they would consider a retrial. Consider. A cold word, administrative, as if weighing options on a spreadsheet. The defense announced their client maintained his innocence. Maintained. Another cold word, as if innocence is a posture you hold, not a truth you live. And then the courthouse emptied, and Chevy Chase went back to its polished quiet, except the quiet no longer felt like peace. It felt like unresolved tension disguised as calm. In the weeks that followed, something strange happened, something that didn't make headlines at first, because it wasn't dramatic enough for the public, but for Marlowe it felt like the floor shifting again. A retired detective from the original 2001 team, one of the men who had carried the case like a weight for years, called Marlowe late one evening. The voice was older, rougher, but urgent. He said there was something he had never been able to place, something that had bothered him for years because it didn't fit, and now, with the mistrial, he couldn't keep it buried anymore. Marlowe listened, pen in hand, heart thudding like he was back at day one. The retired detective talked about a tip from 2001 that had been logged and quietly dismissed because it sounded ridiculous. A person, anonymous then, had called and said they saw someone walking away from Elena's house that night carrying something long and wrapped, like a bundle, like a rolled-up rug, and the caller said the person moved with a limp. The tip had been vague, the caller unreliable, no corroboration, no camera footage. It had been filed under unconfirmed. The retired detective said he always wondered if it wasn't a rug at all, but a tool bag, or something else. And the limp, he never forgot the limp. Marlowe's stomach tightened. Graham did not limp. Not that anyone had ever noted. Not in surveillance, not in court. But limps can come and go. Injuries heal. Or the man in that tip wasn't Graham. Marlowe pulled the old tip sheet and stared at it under a desk lamp like it might burn. He reread the words, the time stamp, the vague location where the caller claimed to be standing. He cross-referenced it with the insomnia witness. He cross-referenced it with the dog track that had led to the curb. He cross-referenced it with nothing, because in 2001 they had no way to turn it into anything. But now there were new tools, new databases, new ways to find people who leave pieces of themselves behind. He dug deeper into the file and found another small detail that had never become a headline, a partial shoe impression near the side of the house, too smeared to make a definitive match, but noted as having an unusual wear pattern, heavier on one side. It could mean nothing. Or it could mean a limp. Or it could mean the surface was uneven. Or it could mean someone carried weight in a certain way. 100 possibilities, none of them proof, all of them needles in a haystack that suddenly felt less random. Marlowe took these fragments to the prosecutor. The prosecutor listened, showed no emotion, but their eyes sharpened. They were preparing for a retrial, and in a retrial, you don't just repeat the same story, you fix weaknesses. You fill gaps. You bring something new. The prosecutor asked the lab to revisit the shoe impression with modern imaging. They asked investigators to canvass again for anyone who remembered a person with a limp in that neighborhood in 2001. It sounded absurd, searching for a limp across decades, but absurd is where cold cases live. Meanwhile, the defense filed motions to dismiss entirely, arguing the mistrial proved the state could not meet its burden. They fought to exclude more evidence, to shrink the story until it contained nothing but doubt. Graham stayed out on bond under restrictions, living in a kind of half-freedom, and Chevy Chase residents watched him in their minds like a phantom, imagining him grocery shopping, driving, existing, and the imagination made them angry because it gave him a life Elena didn't have. Then, one afternoon, another development hit, quietly at first, then with a rising hum. A genealogical analyst, reviewing the family tree work for the case, noticed something that hadn't been emphasized before because everyone's eyes had locked onto Graham's branch once the direct match came in. A second branch existed, another line with shared segments that overlapped parts of the profile but had been deemed less likely, less tight, less clean. It had been pushed aside as the net narrowed. The analyst wondered if, in a mixed sample situation, a secondary contributor might be present, someone related to Graham's line, or someone connected through the same broader network. The analyst wasn't making accusations. They were doing what science does when certainty fails to produce closure, asking if the model needs to change. Marlowe felt the hairs on his arms rise, because the implication was poisonous and electrifying all at once. If there was another contributor, another person connected genetically, then the case wasn't a single silhouette. It was a shadow with depth. It suggested a possibility nobody wanted to say out loud because it would complicate everything. What if Graham's DNA being present didn't mean he acted alone? What if the night involved someone else, someone with a limp, someone who carried something wrapped, someone who could have been missed because investigators, once they had a match, stopped looking at the edges? In the weeks after the mistrial, the case didn't cool down. It mutated. It grew more complex, more dangerous, because complexity is where defense teams thrive, but it's also where truth sometimes hides. Chevy Chase residents listened to rumors again, 2 suspects, secret accomplice, cover-up, mistake, and every rumor felt like a new crack in the ice under their rebuilt sense of safety. Elena's family, already wounded by waiting, now had to endure the worst kind of suspense, the possibility that the answer they'd been offered was only part of the story. And Marlowe, sitting in the glow of his desk lamp with the file open and the night outside pressing against the window, felt the case pull him back in with a grip that didn't care about exhaustion or doubt. The headline had promised a cracked cold case. The courtroom had delivered a mistrial. The evidence now whispered a darker possibility. The past wasn't done, it had simply changed shape, and somewhere between DNA certainty and human uncertainty, Elena's last night still existed like a locked room, silent, waiting, and furious that the world kept calling it solved when it was still bleeding questions into the dark.